Snow had this cruel habit of blanketing the world in silence, as if it were possible to bury noises, crimes, and secrets beneath a white blanket. And in the Orlov universe, there was no commodity more valuable than silence. That morning, Moscow was a shattered porcelain platter beneath a leaden sky. The cold was a predator that bit at exposed flesh and stole one's breath. Mikhail Orlov's mansion, a monolith of smoked glass and dark stone, rose on the hill like a Soviet castle, breathing thick smoke from its chimneys. An ancient beast that knew how to wait. The marble of the main portal was polished with the patience of power. Katerina stepped onto the frozen gravel of the honorary courtyard. The sound was dry, almost harsh, the crunch of pebbles beneath her Italian leather boots. She felt every shard of winter hit her face, a face the town had learned to recognize and fear, a face with hard lines, gray eyes that seemed to see beyond the flesh. She was the face of Orlov, an heiress whose pedigree lay not in her blood, but in the hardness of the character she forged. She lit a cigarette with steady fingers, the habitual gesture of someone lighting not a flame, but a memory. The engine of the black Mercedes-Benz S600 with level 7 armor still vibrated behind her. The raw power of the machine pulsed down Katerina's spine, like the strength of her own family. Ilya, the middle brother, a 40-year-old man with a trim beard and the fragility of a boy inside, gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. He didn't look at her. He stared at the rearview mirror, monitoring the silence. Pavel, her older brother, was already waiting for her at the main entrance. Pavel was the cement of the empire, expressionless, lethally patient, wearing the same old suit that looked like it was made of sheet steel, and a gaze that weighed people down like perishable goods. He saw her as a necessary time bomb. Katerina was one, perhaps the only one he truly respected. The cigarette smoke entered her throat with the same sting of belated truths. She exhaled toward the gray sky, sketching a fleeting specter of a ghost that haunted her. Katerina was not born in Orlov, but the whole world had been forced to forget this inconvenient detail. Katerina's life began in the emergency room and anonymity of a municipal hospital on a December morning that shattered the thermometer. Her biological mother, a third-tier domestic servant at the mansion, had died in childbirth. She left only a sweaty sheet of paper stained with ink and dried tears, with a simple and terrifying will. The girl's custody belonged to Mikhail, the master, as if the world could fit into a possessive pronoun. Mikhail Orlov accepted the responsibility with the same cold pragmatism with which he signed an arms contract. Back then, disputing Mikhail Orlov was like signing a certificate of eternal absence. He took her for himself, gave her his surname, the bed in the room with wide windows overlooking the city, and the life of someone born under warm lights and expensive fabrics, but with a shadow behind. She was given to Irina, Mikhail's wife, a woman of ancient beauty and eyes that had given up fighting fate too soon. Irina loved her in her own harsh way, with demands and silences, teaching her the discipline of the salon and the etiquette that conceals crime. Katerina learned to call her father the man who taught her how to converse with silence. Silence speaks louder than words, Mikhail would say, his hand heavy on the girl's head, as he taught her to read between the lines of gestures. She learned to treat the boys who gave her fists and teeth as brothers, as well as imperfect hugs in the most unexpected moments. Ilya, the dreamer, taught her to use irony as a shield. Pavel, the pragmatist, taught her to read the map of Moscow as if it were her own destiny. In that empire of steel and vodka, love was always a double-edged sword. It served to protect and to cut. They grew up together, three big fish in a frozen pond. But when the pond breaks, each crack chooses its path. Katerina always knew she wasn't blood, but she was the most like her father, ambitious, ruthless when necessary, and utterly resistant to panic. Katerina's childhood was a lesson in strength. She wasn't a real Orlov, and all the staff, butlers, and security guards knew it. This distinction, which initially diminished her, ultimately strengthened her. She had to fight. The first time Pavel called her a bastard, Katerina was 10 years old. They were in the library, the only place in the house where Mikhail allowed books to be disordered. Pavel, already tall and with the weight of the future on his shoulders, had knocked over his stack of volumes. Katerina responded by throwing a heavy dictionary at his foot. The fight that ensued wasn't a childish one. It was a power struggle in captivity. Pavel pinned her down, and Ilya, the only one laughing, tried to separate them with a bad joke about the Tsar. Mikhail found them with Pavel's nose bleeding and Katerina's knee scraped. The punishment wasn't a beating, but silence. "What does the silence tell you?" he asked, his voice low, more dangerous than thunder. Pavel answered first. "That we are weak for fighting in public, Ochim, stepfather." Katerina, wiping the blood from her face with her sleeve, said, "That if we don't defend ourselves here, the world outside will devour us without anyone caring." Mikhail didn't smile. He just nodded and stared at her with the respect that killed her and elevated her at the same time. "Your sister has the right lesson, Pavel. But you need to learn to choose your enemies, Katerina. And more importantly, to hide the reason for your fight." Irina, on the other hand, tried to protect her the only way she knew how, with discipline. She taught Katerina to play the piano, forcing her fingers on the keyboard until they bled, ensuring she could sit at any table and look like a princess, not a maid's daughter. "Appearance is your first armor, Katerina. Never let it fall." Years later, at 15, Katerina escaped a poorly planned kidnapping by a rival gang. She didn't panic. She feigned cooperation, waited for the driver to be distracted by the radio, and, using a stolen screwdriver, cut the tire belt. When the car stopped, she ran. Pavel and Ilya found her hours later walking on the highway, covered in mud and with a hole in her sleeve where the henchman grabbed her. Pavel hugged her tightly, an awkward, bone-tight hug. "You're crazy, Kat," Ilya cried, the panic she never felt overflowing through him. In that empire of steel, love always came like this, wrapped in violence and fear. The day Katerina discovered her own origins began with the banality of a cut on her finger. She was 16 and already a functioning cog in the empire. She was sitting on the floor in one of the smaller warehouses, a concrete labyrinth outside the city that Orlov used to divert shipments. Her task was to label boxes of diverted medicines, a new clean line Ilya had found ingenious for laundering money, mixing stolen medicines with legitimate supplies for sham hospitals. A trickle of blood, dark and warm, dripped onto the label of a morphine box. Katerina stood up irritably, the sharp pain in her finger an insult to her concentration. She searched for a cloth, some gauze. Opening the musty, rarely used first aid cabinet, she found a rusty metal box hidden behind expired bandages, a treasure trove of old photographs and documents, things no one had touched in years belonging to a past the house was trying to suffocate. He squeezed his finger, staining the edges of the photos with his blood, and saw the image of a woman. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, she wore a cotton nurse's dress, and her eyes looked like someone who hadn't learned to smile. The photo was low quality, but the intensity of her gaze was unmistakable. There was a notation on the edge, written in fountain pen, "Alina Morozova, December 1978. The handwriting belonged to that former butler, Yuri, who had disappeared without saying goodbye years before. Katerina dug deeper. She found a yellowed letter folded in 4 with deep creases, bearing the dry official postmark of a Moscow municipal clinic. The paper smelled of alcohol, urgency, and old paper. She read it standing up, feeling as if she were floating on the cold concrete of the warehouse. "I hand over custody of my daughter, born on this date, December 19, 1978, to Mr. Mikhail Orlov, who protected us while I was able to work in his house. He guaranteed me a job and a safe place, and I ask that you care for her as if she were your own. I no longer have a family or resources. May fate be less cruel to the girl than it was to me. Signature, Alina Morozova." The will was short, desperate. The pain in her finger faded, replaced by a cold emptiness in her chest. Her surname, the weight of absence, Mikhail's protection, but also the lie. He hadn't stolen her. He had accepted her, but he had turned her humble origins into a state secret. Honor was diluted with betrayal. A door opened behind her, and Katerina turned with a start she couldn't hide. Pavel stood there, watching his sister blankly, like a boulder, but his eyes betrayed him. A lapse of pity, or guilt, or both. It was a split second. Enough, Pavel knew. Katerina tucked the box into her coat, acting as calmly as if she'd just signed her own death warrant. She didn't mention what she'd seen, but she spent the rest of the day with a coolness that was noticeable even to the most distracted security guards. That evening, the Orlov mansion was silent. Mikhail and Irina had gone out for a business dinner. Katerina went to Ilya's office, the only one that maintained a welcoming clutter. He was in a leather armchair, leafing through a book on Renaissance architecture, a glass of Russian vodka in his hand. Katerina sat on the edge of the table and thrust Alina Morozova's photo in front of him. She didn't ask. She just waited. Ilya lifted the glass to his lips, swallowed it in one go, and dropped the book to the floor with a thud. He looked at her with a sadness only the weakest member of the family could express. "Pavel told me you found Yuri's treasure." The mention of the missing butler was another loose end Katerina would have to tie up. "We shouldn't have hidden it, Kat. But the old man forbade us to bring it up. He was afraid you'd find out he had a weakness, an origin he couldn't control." Katerina kept her eyes fixed on his, the gray intensity demanding the naked truth. "Who was she, Ilya, besides the possessive pronoun in the note?" "Alina? She was from work. She worked in the kitchen before being transferred to the laundry. A simple girl, with eyes that seemed to apologize for existing. She was sick, very sick, in her last months. Tuberculosis, I think. She had no family, no one. Mikhail kept her, paid for the hospital in the end. When she knew she was going to die, she wrote that note. What Pavel saw is the truth, Kat. You are blood, but by another name. It wasn't our decision. It was hers, and the old man's. He saved her. He saved you." Ilya lit a cigarette, smoking slowly, the blue smoke filling the silence. "The old man is a man of hunger and promises, Kat. He promised your mother a life for you, and he kept it. He saved us too, can you believe it? Life comes wrapped in disasters. Yours, at least, has a silk bow. An Orlov bow, but a bow nonetheless." Katerina's cry wasn't of water, it was of ice. It froze and cut her insides without witnesses. She simply nodded, stood, and left the office, leaving Ilya alone with the echo of her honesty. Katerina didn't cry. She went to her room and stared at the stucco ceiling, listening to the piano coming from some hallway downstairs. It was Irina, playing a Russian sonata that the house played to no one. The music was the soundtrack to her new solitude. The next morning, she appeared in Mikhail's office unannounced. The room was a sanctuary of power. Dark wood, crystal globes, military maps of areas of interest, and a silence that weighed heavily. Mikhail sat in his leather chair, his hand heavy on the polished wood top. His expression was inscrutable, but she felt the slight tremor in his jaw. He knew the time had come. He looked her up and down, slowly, like someone evaluating a work of art that had just been broken. "Pavel and Ilya are terrible at keeping quiet," she said, her voice low without a tremor. "It's not their fault, it's inevitable. I made them keep a secret that was beyond them. It was mine, Katerina. If you came to ask me why, the answer is that life is a sum of decisions that avoid the worst. I was your worst, and yet I was your salvation." Her motherhood asked me with her eyes before asking with her pen. She begged you not to know the life she knew. And what did you give me in return? A foundation, a name, a future that didn't involve poverty or anonymity. Katerina inclined her head, a gesture she seemed to both revere and despise. It was her signature. "Thank you for lying to me for so many years, Dad." The word dad sounded like a bullet that chooses not to leave the barrel of a gun, but destroys the chamber. Mikhail sighed, a man exhausted by his own justifications. He took off his coat and threw it over the chair, exposing his silk shirt. "Sometimes the truth is a blow our people don't deserve. I protected you, Katerina, from yourself and your origins." She nodded with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, but I'm an adult now, Dad, and in that moment, I decided that protecting could also mean destroying." He looked back at her, understanding the danger. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. From that moment on, Katerina was no longer the sheltered daughter. She was a force. She then took on the dirty work she was offered with almost religious commitment. From that day forward, Katerina dedicated herself to understanding the anatomy of the Orlov Empire. Not as an heiress, but as a surgeon mapping the tumor. She entered the arms and human trafficking circles. She learned to negotiate in warehouses filled with dust and lies. She understood the deals with loanable police officers and judges longing for a deal under an envelope. She accustomed her stomach to meetings with men who only have two expressions, that of killing and that of promising heaven for a kilo of cocaine. She studied the twisted codes of honor, the loyalties that broke at the right price, and the invisible lines that separated what was tolerated from what was lethal. Her brothers watched her. She learned to read the silences of Irina, Mikhail's wife, who loved her in her own harsh way, sewing the hems of her dresses while giving her advice on the inherent dishonesty of men. She heard from Pavel the secret geography of the Black Sea supply routes, the impeccable logistics of diverting goods, the composure required to liquidate a contract or a man. Pavel taught her the patience of waiting, the art of not reacting. He saw Ilya lose his temper with border smugglers and regain it with a poorly delivered joke that served as an ultimatum. Ilya tried to maintain a light touch amidst the weight of crime. Katerina was all the Orlovs on the street and none of them on the inside. She had built a mental vault. She mentally noted every trapdoor, every name and date, every crack through which the empire breathed, every shell bank account. She was building her own mind map, but this time, with the intention of blowing them up. It was years of deep immersion in the rot, until the day Katerina realized she needed distance. The empire was contaminating her, and she needed a cleansing, a perspective, a magnifying glass. She went down to Mikhail's office on an afternoon when the weak sun barely filtered through the windows. The office was filled with cigar smoke. She stood at her desk with the same calm he had taught her. "I'm leaving," he announced. Mikhail looked up from the document he was signing, his gold pen poised on the paper. His first reaction was a hoarse laugh. "Where to? To a less cold hell? I have an old dream that I've put off for too long. I want to study medicine." His mouth twisted skeptically, but there was a glint of interest in his eyes. "Medicine? The whole world bleeds with my decisions, with the successes I make, with the bodies I bury. And you want to stitch people together? For what?" Katerina smiled. Not a sarcastic smile, but a deliberate one. "Maybe I'd like to learn how to stitch the wounds you leave, Father, and understand the anatomy of pain." He stared at her for a long time, with a respect he himself didn't understand, mixed with the disappointment of losing his best piece on the board. "You're a machine, Katerina, not a scalpel. If you are, come back in one piece. Don't force me to come after you." "I'll be back when it's time, Father." He sighed, rested his hands on the table and waved goodbye. "Go, but remember, Orlov isn't just a name, it's a debt." Katerina left. The world would think she had gone to school. Katerina knew she was going to war. She didn't go to school, or at least not to conventional medicine. Katerina's absence from the Orlov mansion wasn't an exile, but an infiltration. She enrolled in another school, the discipline of waiting. The fake address was in St. Petersburg, a functional apartment on a side street that smelled of sea air and musty history. The enrollment in preparatory courses was real: history, economics, even a brief attempt at medical Latin, but attendance was rare. She paid the tuition, kept her records clean, and sent postcards with irrelevant views to Irina and her siblings when she wanted them to stop asking. Pavel called every 2 weeks, a short, functional call, like a report. Ilya sent witty messages, full of barely concealed concern. Katerina returned the affection with the distance necessary to maintain her sanity and her plan. Most of the time, Katerina wasn't in St. Petersburg. She was distant, traveling between faces, roadside hotels, and smaller towns that the Moscow Mafia used as distribution centers. She wove a web of information with the patience of someone who knows that desperation is the greatest enemy of revenge. The world is generous to those who wait, but for crime, waiting is discipline. For hatred, it is nourishment. The first strand of the web came from Vladim, a former man of Mikhail's. Vladim had left the empire with an ugly scar on his neck, where a position of trust had once stood. Katerina found him in an industrial city, living under an assumed name, working in a filthy metalworks. She offered him neither money nor forgiveness, just a chance to talk. Revenge, she discovered, doesn't require bribery. It requires a listening ear. Vladim, bitter and fearful, spilled the first names of money-laundering lawyers with the precision of doctor's gloves, the account numbers in Switzerland and Cyprus, and Mikhail's nocturnal habits. Katerina wrote down each person's physiognomy. She used a hardcover notebook that, for all intents and purposes, was an anatomy journal, but inside was a map of the Orlov family's vital organs. She developed a photographic eye. She learned to capture the license plate of a moving truck, the expression of a driver at a traffic light, the color of a contact's coat. She photographed warehouses that seemed abandoned and during the day were nothing more than industrial skeletons. But at dawn they were alive with shipping trucks, lights on for 10 minutes, and steel doors opening and closing with the efficiency of a surgical machine. She didn't use sophisticated technology. She employed the slowness and invisibility that crime never expects from a beautiful young woman. Months turned into years. Katerina became an expert at reading the invisible. She tracked transportation routes, noticing that trucks from a shell company, Nevsky Transport, had the same downtime and tire-changing patterns as trucks from a humanitarian aid NGO, United Hands. It was Mikhail's method, mixing corruption with sanctity, making illicit accounting part of the legal routine. She patiently assembled a mosaic of shipping dates, destinations, and times. The fake company names changed quarterly, but the license plates changed like ties following a predictable cycle. Katerina cracked the algorithm. She had the discipline of a monk and the coolness of a geologist mapping a fault. During one of her stints in a southern city, she gained the most valuable access, a retired accountant from Orlov. The man, tormented by ghosts and cheap vodka, had a habit of playing chess alone in a park. Katerina sat at the opposite table. She didn't seduce or threaten him. She simply played with him in silence for weeks. On a drizzly afternoon, he broke down. "You have his look," he whispered, moving a pawn the wrong way. "No, I have mine, and I want to know where the purchase and sale receipts for the ghost hospitals are," she replied, moving her rook to check. The accountant, cornered in life and on the board, gave her the names of 3 charitable hospitals that served only as fronts to launder millions in medical equipment and narcotics. He detailed the hierarchical structure and the way the money circulated, passing through a dozen consulting firms before returning clean to the empire. Katerina wrote it all down. She smoothed out every detail until the outline was as clear as a clean bone on an X-ray. The empire wasn't a brute force. It was a meticulous and arrogant structure. The web grew to include the pillars of power that sustained Mikhail, the judges, bought with vacations at European resorts and the promise of impunity, the police chiefs, who received bulky envelopes to delay raids at critical times, and finally the politicians, who ensured that drug distribution contracts always went to Orlov's shell companies. Katerina began noticing a recurring name in reports of warrant delays and the cooling of important investigations. It wasn't the name of a big fish, but of a man quietly rising through the ranks of the capital's police force, a name associated with the new narcotics division. She underlined the name, crossed it out carefully, and decided she had to go back. The time for collection was over. The time for execution was near. When she returned, she was a different woman. Her hair was slightly darker, a precise cut that accentuated the lines of her face. Her gaze was like a lighthouse that doesn't warn, just scans the horizon. Moscow greeted her with the same anti-skeptical cold and media sirens of a city that, when it yawns, destroys 3 small towns. Ilya hugged her in the courtyard, his joy honest and slightly desperate. "Medicine has done you good, Kat. You look, more dangerous." "I just learned to name things that already hurt," she replied, feeling the weight of his coat against hers. Pavel silently probed her, like someone checking the weight of a suitcase. He was looking for vulnerabilities, but Katerina had shielded herself. He nodded, pleased with the strength she radiated. Irina wept, holding her by the shoulders and kissing her face with a caress that was almost aggressive. Mikhail smiled dangerously, that smile you can't see, only the way he lets the cigar smoke slowly escape between his teeth. "Did medicine cure you?" "He named the things that already hurt," she replied, repeating the phrase to her father. "And his anatomy is perfect, Dad. I know where all his bones are." The empire continued, larger and more arrogant. The market for morphine and derivatives had grown exponentially. The new partner in the East had come in to supply heavier caliber weapons, and the trusted police officer was now in command of a key division in the capital, perfect for delaying raids and cooling warrants. This police officer's name had been appearing on Katerina's web with disturbing frequency. She underlined it, crossed it out carefully, and decided she needed to see him up close. She needed to gauge the stature of the man who was protecting the empire from within her heart. The name was Danil Volkov. The meeting was less choreographed than Katerina had anticipated. It took place in the cold corridor of the Moscow Investigative Committee, an ugly, functional concrete building, when she accompanied one of the Orlov family's lawyers to an absurd metal and glass room to discuss misunderstandings. The lawyer left to retrieve a document, and the next door, which led to a high-ranking official's office, opened like the mouth of a curious animal. A tall man emerged with a heavy coat, dark, disheveled hair, and a week's worth of stubble. He had the eyes of a tired wolf, but they scanned the room with an uncomfortable intelligence. "Volkov," the secretary said hurriedly behind him. "Danil Volkov." He looked up at Katerina. It was a moment that broke soundlessly, like ice underfoot on a silent morning. There are people we recognize without ever having met them, as if their bodies held a memory of an inevitable future that the mind has not yet grasped. Danil Volkov was one of those people. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" His voice was deep and had a polite weariness, as if he were always apologizing for what the city demanded of him. Katerina smiled, the smile she wore when a door opened and she knew she wanted to go in, even if it was a trap. "Only if you can help the time pass faster, Major Volkov." He chuckled. His laugh was rare and sad, a sound that seemed to break something. Time doesn't let itself be helped. It just runs until it catches up with us. Katerina held out her hand, firm, without hesitation. "Kat," he squeezed her hand. The touch was warm and heavy, too honest for the surroundings. He didn't ask her last name, as if there was already an unspoken pact of incomplete names. "Daniil." She felt a twinge, the first sign that the discipline of waiting and hatred would, at that moment, be challenged by something more dangerous. Recognition. They met again at a cafe near the river, a small, inconspicuous place, a coincidence big cities tolerate when they want to play village. The cafe, with its fogged windows and smell of ground beans, seemed an unlikely refuge for two predators. He drank strong, unsweetened black tea, his large hands warming the porcelain cup. She drank unsweetened coffee as always, the usual bitterness, a familiar comfort. They spoke first with their eyes, then with sentences that avoided the center, touching only the edges of what truly mattered. Daniil asked what she did. Katerina didn't lie, but she used the truth as a labyrinth. "I'm trying to be better than I was, settling old scores." He nodded, unsurprised. "We all try. Some really try. Others just justify the choices that kept us alive." "And you?" Katerina asked, resting her chin on her hand and watching the way the light from the window reflected off his dark hair. "What do you collect, Major Volkov?" "I collect sins and files," he replied with the same sadness in his laugh. "Other people's sins, mostly. And the files are my inventory." "Are you a police officer?" "I'm a man with a badge. The badge allows me to enter places that need cleaning, and keeps me from leaving them when the smell becomes unbearable." "Do you like what you do?" "I like what I think should be done. And I fail every day, Katerina. I fail to be a hero, I fail to be a bureaucrat, and I fail to keep the city afloat without getting my hands dirty." The wind brushed their faces outside, like something that blesses and threatens at the same time. Katerina felt a pang in her chest, a dagger of pity. Guilt has a breath that can be learned, and Daniil's was evident, even beneath the cynicism. She left the cafe with his number saved in the night, an access code to the darkness. On the way back, Moscow turned on its lights, and each light seemed like a sentence. "Don't fall in love," said the part of her that studied, that planned, that drew her own coldness with a ruler. But the other part, human and tired, stretched out her hands like someone seeking warmth on a night where fire is the only truth. The romance didn't happen. It erupted, first in the conversations that lasted hours and seemed to fit into 10 minutes. Text messages encrypted with the urgency of someone who knows time is a dangerous luxury. Then, in the shared silences that felt like the pause before a gunshot. Finally, in the ringing, Daniil took her to his apartment, a Spartan and unassuming space. There were too many books, piled on every surface, and too few things. The bed had clean sheets, the arrangement of someone trying to tidy up what life throws at them every day. The place smelled of strong coffee and old paper, a stark contrast to the heavy aroma of Cuban cigars and cold marble of the Orlov mansion. He kissed her with a care that bordered on urgency, like someone unwilling to awaken a painful memory. Katerina allowed herself a fraction of the tenderness she hadn't given anyone, not since childhood. In that strand of dark hair that fell across his gaze in the moment he sighed against her neck, she knew. She was making the most certain mistake of her life. "You still haven't asked me who I am," she said in the dark, lying on his shoulder, listening to the rhythm of his heart fighting against fatigue. "You haven't told me yet," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Maybe I don't know how to ask, Kat, and maybe I don't want to know the whole answer." "I may not know the full answer," she added. They laughed with a gravity that didn't suit laughter. Love, when it arrives in the midst of war, doesn't ask for permission or an apology. It only asks for two hands. Katerina began using Daniil as a breath of fresh air. At Orlov's house, the tension was palpable. Pavel was quieter than usual, inspecting each new shipment with a nervousness he tried to hide. Ilya was more distracted, stumbling over jokes and documents. They felt the lake cracking, but they couldn't tell where the pressure was coming from. Katerina returned to Daniil in the wee hours of the morning. They talked about the city, about justice, and the cost of being good in a place that only rewards cruelty. "My job," Daniil explained one night, his body heavy on the mattress, "is about damage control. If I let my anger run wild, the city will turn into a senseless bloodbath. Sometimes, Katerina, you have to let the tumor grow slowly to make sure the scalpel can remove it all without metastasizing. And who is the surgeon in this metaphor, Daniil? You or the tumor? I am the man who tries to keep the scalpel clean, knowing that it will be dirty anyway. The first crack in their love and their plan came one morning, a distant siren wailing. Katerina woke to her cell phone vibrating like an abyss. She answered on the second ring, hearing Pavel's voice tense on the other end. The guardian angel smiled. Pavel said, irony creeping into his voice. A poorly scheduled raid on one of the storage houses. The border patrol backed out at the last minute, citing miscommunication. They were going to catch us in the act, Kat. We'd missed the shipment from the east. When she hung up, she sat on the window seat and lit another cigarette, staring out at the empty street like someone reading a letter that refuses to be sent. The angel had a name. It was drawn into the web she had woven for years. Someone within the police force, high enough, smart enough to feign war and manage peace. A man with the power to postpone a border raid at the last minute. The face began to take shape inside Katerina's head, a shadow she tried to dislodge out of shame. The math was simple, painful, and inevitable. Daniil Volkov was the new head of the division that coordinated narcotics and border operations. The next day, Katerina secluded herself in the old accounting office, under the pretext of organizing Ilya's inventories. She took advantage of a slip of the tongue, and, using a shortcut Ilya had learned from a sad, painkiller-addicted hacker, accessed an internal file on the Orlov network. It contained lists of operations, downtime, and encrypted communications between managers and delegates. She worked with the coolness of a computer, scanning the critical dates. His name appeared first in initials, then in mentions, then in an innocent email. It was a communication between one of Orlov's managers and an anonymous contact in the police, dated the previous night. The email, read with the right eyes, was a love note to crime, confirmation that the border operation would be delayed due to a matter of higher jurisdiction. The contact was signed only with the initials, DV. Katerina froze. She wondered how many DVs could fit in a city of 12 million, but her body already knew. It said time wouldn't let itself be helped. Time throws us the same stone until we learn to dodge it, and the stone had his name engraved on it. Katerina closed her laptop with a calmness that startled her. She went to the kitchen, turned on the faucet, and let the cold water run over her hands. The water always seems enough to put out any fire until the fire is inside. She returned to her room, grabbed her coat, and went out to walk aimlessly in the snow, as if allowing the world to decide a few steps. The phone vibrated. It was Daniil. Today, 7 p.m.? I need to tell you a story. It's important. She typed yes, without breathing. The plan that was supposed to be slow had suddenly become a race. At 7 p.m., the bar he chose was a warm aquarium, with dark lamps and the cheap melancholy of jazz. Daniil was already waiting for her, with that expression of someone carrying a weariness no one asked of him. He looked at her with an intensity that was almost a preemptive apology. I need to tell you something about myself, he began, staring into his glass of whiskey. I've never lied to you, Katerina, but I've always kept you in the shadows. Not out of malice, but out of caution. I thought the shadows would protect you. Katerina rested her elbows on the table, clasped her hands under her chin, and prepared for war. I am part of an arrangement that keeps the city standing, an unspoken agreement that existed before me, before you, and that will exist after us. Sometimes, Katerina, you have to divert resources, postpone raids to capture something bigger. Something bigger than what, Daniil? Than chaos, than the hunger for blood without an owner. We manage crime so that it doesn't swallow us all. Organized crime, at least, has an address and a face, and I've been working for years to map that face. He took a deep breath, and Katerina saw the lie blend with the truth in an indecipherable way. My uncle is a man you know, and my position here, my rapid rise, was facilitated by him. A bargain, a promise of silence in exchange for influence. The family hates me, but he trusted me, and I used that trust as a trapdoor. The world tilted. Katerina blinked slowly, as if accepting a bullet, because dignity is the only visible weapon when all others fall. Mikhail Orlov, my uncle, on my mother's side. I never used his name, not out of shame, out of strategy. I thought I could steer all this toward a bloodless resolution. You, free. They, imprisoned or exiled. Me, a kind of righteous ghost. So you're the mole. You used me. You used your family to get to the top. I tried to save you from the place where you were born, Kat. I saw you at the committee and knew. I tried to lead you astray. The mole loves too, Katerina." She laughed mirthlessly. "I wasn't born there, Daniil. I was placed. And you? There are no proper ghosts. Only men who sell themselves so they can sleep at night." Daniil kept his eyes on her, the gaze of a man ready to be caught. He reached across the table, pausing before touching her fingers. "Say something to scare me, Kat. Tell me I've lost you. Tell me you're going to tell on me. Tell me what you need to say." Katerina pressed her mouth to the rim of the glass and drank the rest, ignoring the taste. She felt the ice resurfacing in her veins. "I'm going to take down your uncle, and I'm going to use the web you helped protect to do it." Daniil closed his eyes for a moment as if praying to no one. "I know," he whispered. "I always knew you were the only one who could do this. Love was a betrayal, but revenge was an alliance." After the revelation at the bar, the dynamic between Katerina and Daniil turned into a silent pact of mutual destruction. They were two people at war, but with the same target, forced to walk the same line. Daniil's betrayal was the only proof of Katerina's honesty. He was the mole, but he was also the key to complete revenge. Their meetings became tense and brief, always in his Spartan apartment. Katerina brought the web she'd built over the years, shipping spreadsheets, bank codes, the list of ghost hospitals. Daniil brought the trapdoors, guard change times at the borders, bureaucratic inspection dates, the names of the men in the police force he couldn't control, the ones who would do the job cleanly. The risk was palpable. Every exchange of glances, every whisper was a gamble. "Mikhail is nervous," Katerina said one cold night, spreading papers on the coffee table. "Pavel is checking his books 3 times a day. He feels the sand running down, but he doesn't know where the hole is." "And Ilya?" Daniil asked, his eyes fixed on the map of jurisdictions Katerina had brought. "Ilya is lost. He looks at me with a guilt that isn't just mine. It's the family's destiny. He always wanted to be free, but he was born Orlov. He's the easiest to break." Daniil then revealed his most audacious plan of action. "We need an accountant, a big name, someone he uses to sign the papers he would never sign, someone with a good enough memory for the prosecutor and timid enough to talk to us. The accountant who gave me the names of the hospitals is scared to death. If I press him, he'll turn to ashes." "Great. Fear is the best discipline. I'll make sure the investigative committee opens an inquiry against one of your lower-level managers tomorrow. The manager will run away. The accountant will think he's next." The plan wasn't a spectacular police raid. It was death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. The dismantling, death by 1,000 cuts. The dismantling began on Monday, with a trivial report in the morning paper about the arrest of a consultant for tax fraud. The name was small fry, but the arrest set off alarm bells in the mansion. The tension inside the house became unbearable. Irina barely left her room, playing her Russian sonata with dissonant notes that sounded like a lament. Ilya paced back and forth, calling lawyers and trying to find the common thread in the prisons. Pavel, the man of steel, broke out in a cold sweat during meetings. Katerina, the architect of chaos, acted like the perfect daughter, attentive, concerned, the only one who kept a cool head. She offered to help Ilya with logistics, giving him full access to shipments and routes. She was the fox guarding the henhouse. The first major cut came from the accountant. Katerina found him in a roadside hotel, his face pale and the vodka trembling in his hand. She handed him a copy of the arrest warrant for her colleague, secured by Daniil. "You have a choice," she said, her voice as cold as Siberian ice. "Your memory, in exchange for comfortable exile and a pension abroad, or your life, if you're loyal to a man who would sell you for a pack of cigars." The accountant, already years of fear, chose his memory. He provided a complete map of the offshore accounts and, more importantly, the name of the state prosecutor who received most of the bribes to cover up the money laundering cases. With this information, Daniil acted, not against Mikhail yet, but against the foundations. The state prosecutor woke up on Tuesday to a surprise tax inspection of his office and residence. The allegation was asset discrepancy. It was a surgically precise operation, carried out by Daniil, who used Katerina's information to pressure a higher judge he trusted. The prosecutor, caught with suitcases of cash in his closet, was forced into exile, taking years of secrets with him. His fall tore a hole in Mikhail's protective ceiling. The raids on the ghost hospitals came next. From within the police force, Daniil coordinated interdepartmental cooperation with an honest health division, ensuring the raid occurred at the most critical time. The media, anonymously contacted by Katerina, arrived alongside the officers. The headlines on Wednesday were a national scandal. Medication fraud hits needy patients. The empire was bleeding. Pavel and Ilya confronted Katerina on Thursday night. They were drunk with tension and fear, the expensive whiskey unable to hide their trembling. "You're involved in this," Pavel hissed, his eyes bloodshot. "You're back to tear the house down, Kat." "I came back to stop the madness," she replied calmly. "What father is doing is not an empire, Pavel. It's a house of cards that's collapsing and you're trapped in it. I'm saving myself." "You're breaking the debt," Ilya shouted. "The debt was paid when he gave me back my name and my hatred," she snapped. "Now I own my own future." They had no proof, only fear. Katerina stood, looking at them with the sadness of someone serving a sentence. "I love you, but love always comes with a double-edged sword, brothers, and this is my time to cut it." The final night. The night of the collapse was a Saturday of violent blizzard, the weather bowing to the human drama. Mikhail was in his office, alone. He had dismissed all the extra security and sent Irina to the villa, sensing the siege. He was waiting. Katerina entered the office without knocking. He was sitting behind his desk, his hand still heavy on the surface. His expression was one of weariness, not defeat. "Daniil Volkov," he said bluntly. "The boy is all grown up. My sister's son. I thought he would betray me for money, not for principles." "He didn't betray you out of principle, father. He betrayed you for me." Mikhail laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Love is always the biggest mistake. But the real betrayal, Katerina, is yours. I gave you everything. You gave me a lie, and a life I didn't choose. You took away my right to be Alina Morozova, the daughter of a humble but regal maid, and you gave me Katerina Orlov, the daughter of a shadow. I protected her from poverty, and condemned me to moral rot. You taught me to read silence, and silence told me that the empire is built on the bones of innocence, including my mother, who died asking for your protection. I do not seek justice, father. I seek retribution." The phone rang on the table, shrill in the silence. Mikhail looked at the receiver, then back at her. "Answer it," Katerina said, gesturing. "It's your time to hear the sound of the fall." It was the news. A government spokesman had just announced the opening of a massive federal investigation into Orlov's import and export companies, based on information from the exiled state prosecutor and the testimonies of accountants. The final blow. Mikhail took the cigar and lit it slowly. The smoke filled the air, thick. "You're cold-blooded, Katerina. I've made many mistakes in life. The worst was teaching you to be stronger than me. Your mistake was loving me with the hands of a murderer. Now I use your tools." The door burst open. Pavel and Ilya entered, pale and covered in snow. They had heard the news on the car radio. They looked from Mikhail to Katerina, understanding the drama. Katerina was the executioner, Daniil the arm of justice, and Mikhail the patriarch watching his own downfall. "Katerina," Ilya whispered, pain on his face. "Why?" "Because if he didn't stop, you wouldn't stop. I had to destroy the house to save what was inside. You and myself." Pavel didn't speak. He simply approached the table, picked up the .45 automatic pistol Mikhail kept in the drawer, removed the magazine, and tossed the empty gun onto the marble floor. It was a gesture of surrender. Mikhail simply watched the scene, the smoke from his cigar rising like a sacrifice. There were no screams, no physical violence. The destruction was wrought with words, codes, and the inevitability of law. Mikhail Orlov's true downfall was seeing the son he most respected abandon the war before it was even over. The last step on the bridge. The next day, chaos was the new order. Federal police were at the mansion, with search and seizure warrants. Mikhail Orlov was taken into custody, expressionless. Irina, in silent shock, was welcomed by Katerina. Pavel and Ilya cooperated with the authorities, handing over documents and passwords. They were devastated, but relieved. The weight of being Orlov had been lifted from their shoulders. Katerina waited for Daniil on the bridge, the same bridge over the Moskva River where they first met in the car. He arrived on foot, his face marked by insomnia, but his eyes finally clear, without the weariness of the secret. "It's done," he said, leaning against the railing, looking at the cracked ice of the river. "It's done," Katerina agreed. "I have a car in the next town. We can disappear. I have a new name. You have yours. We can go where the ice won't know us. We can start over, Katerina. No past, no debt. He reached out to her, a simple, honest, desperate plea. Katerina looked at his hand. She felt the temptation, the love, life without the burden, the escape. But the discipline Mikhail had taught him wasn't just about hate, it was about responsibility. I can't go, she said, her voice low but firm. You taught me that time catches up with us, and my time is now here. I used my family, I used you, I used the name he gave me to do this. I owe a debt greater than any escape, Daniil. To the orphans he made, to the money he stole, to the house I broke. I have to rebuild, not an empire, a house, an honest memory. Daniil didn't pressure her. He knew what he loved about her was her strength, and her strength kept her from being the woman who would run away with him. He leaned over and kissed her forehead, a gesture of respect and farewell. You will become a legend here, Katerina, the girl who overthrew her own father. I will be the legend who disappeared in the north. I will be the righteous ghost who failed to be a hero, but who made the right choice once, with you. He took a step back, turned and walked away, disappearing into the winter mist. Katerina didn't look back. She knew he loved her enough to leave when her victory required solitude. Epilogue. The gravel in the house. 3 months later. Moscow swallowed the Orlov scandal with the speed of an impatient bureaucrat. There was the parade of lawyers and prosecutors, the long and tedious process of asset confiscation, and the public exposure of the crime. Mikhail, sentenced to a long term in a maximum security prison, received his sentence with the same expressionless silence. Katerina, Ilya, and Pavel were acquitted of crimes, but not of moral complicity. They were forced to face the estate. Katerina, using the money she had managed to save from Mikhail's private account, founded the Alina Morozova Foundation, dedicated to repairing families affected by drug fraud and corruption. Irina, the silent matriarch, finally found peace in action. She stopped playing the piano and began coordinating the foundation's logistics, turning her discipline into something useful. Ilya and Pavel, relieved of their cruel fate, dedicated themselves to the task, rebuilding, not the empire but the house. They sold the marble and glass mansion, used the remaining legal funds to finance the repairs, and purchased smaller, more honest properties. They found in humility the peace that arrogance could never give them. They were brothers again, united not by fear, but by the task of being better. Katerina stood in the courtyard of the foundation's new headquarters, an old renovated building. Winter had passed and the ground was dry but covered in new gravel. She lit a cigarette, the usual gesture. The smoke burned the same way. She remembered Mikhail's words. Life comes packaged in disasters. But life, she thought, is also the only one that allows us to unfold the packages and choose what to keep. Katerina stepped forward onto the gravel. The sound was dry and familiar, the crunch of pebbles beneath her boots. But this time the sound wasn't a sentence. It was an honest beginning, the sound of someone who had finally chosen themselves.